There's something quietly terrifying about a person who looks completely fine. They show up. They smile at the right moments. They answer when you ask how they're doing. They function. They carry on. And from the outside, everything looks normal. But there's a version of suffering that doesn't announce itself. It doesn't cry in public or ask for help. It doesn't look dramatic. It just quietly builds, underneath the surface, underneath the routine, underneath the perfectly constructed version of, "I'm okay," that some people have been rehearsing for years. The truth is that severe emotional distress is one of the most misunderstood states a human being can be in. Because we've been conditioned to believe that pain looks a certain way. We expect visible tears. We expect someone to fall apart. We expect the signs to be obvious. But they almost never are. What usually happens is something far more subtle. Behavioral patterns shift. Energy disappears in ways that seem explainable. A person pulls back from things they used to love, slowly, quietly, in ways that are easy to dismiss as stress or a bad week. And by the time anyone notices, the suffering has already gone very deep. In this video, we're going to explore 8 warning signs of severe emotional distress, not the dramatic kind, but the quiet kind. The kind that hides in plain sight. The kind that you may have already noticed in someone close to you. Or the kind you may have been living with yourself, without fully knowing what to call it. By the end of this video, you'll understand emotional distress in a way most people never do. And that understanding might change everything. If you find value in videos that explore the deeper layers of human psychology and emotional experience, take a moment to subscribe before we continue. Most people scroll past that button, but subscribing is a small thing that genuinely keeps this channel alive. These conversations matter, and they're always worth having. Let's start with something most people never say out loud. There's a specific kind of exhaustion that has nothing to do with sleep. You can rest all weekend and still wake up Monday feeling hollowed out. You can lie in bed for 10 hours and still feel like the weight on your chest never fully lifted. That's not physical tiredness. That's emotional depletion. And it's one of the earliest signs that something inside a person is struggling in a way that the body is starting to mirror. The first warning sign of severe emotional distress is chronic, unexplained exhaustion, fatigue that doesn't respond to rest, that seems to exist beneath the surface of ordinary life, and that makes even simple decisions feel like enormous effort. People experiencing this often describe it as feeling like they're moving through water. Like everything costs more than it should. Like they can perform the basics of life, go to work, make the food, answer the messages, but there's nothing left afterward. No energy for joy. No energy for connection. Just the bare minimum, repeated over and over again. This matters because exhaustion is often the first thing we dismiss. We tell ourselves we're just busy. Just stressed. Just need a vacation. And for many people, that's true. But when exhaustion becomes persistent, when it follows you into your rest, when it outlasts the weekend, when it makes you feel distant from your own life, that's when it stops being ordinary tiredness and starts being a signal. The second warning sign is emotional withdrawal. Not the dramatic kind where a person slams doors or makes their distance obvious. The quiet kind. Where someone stops initiating conversations. Stops texting first. Stops showing up to things they used to look forward to. Starts making excuses that feel slightly too convenient. This is often mistaken for introversion, or being busy, or going through a phase. But watch carefully. When someone who was once warm starts to disappear, not loudly, not dramatically, but slowly, almost imperceptibly, that disappearance is saying something. It's saying that the world has become too heavy to engage with in the way it used to be. Here's what most people don't realize. Emotional distress rarely reveals itself through the emotions we expect. We expect sadness. We expect crying. We expect someone to look visibly broken. What we don't expect is irritability. But one of the clearest signs of severe emotional distress is a person who has become unusually reactive, short-tempered, easily frustrated, snapping at small things that wouldn't have bothered them before. A tone of voice. A slow driver. A misread text message. The reason this happens is psychological. When a person is carrying enormous amounts of unprocessed emotional pain, their nervous system is already running on overload. It has very little capacity left to regulate. So everything feels louder. Everything feels more threatening. The emotional skin becomes thinner. What looks like anger is almost always grief or fear wearing a different mask. This is where things become dangerous, because people around someone in distress often pull away when irritability appears. They feel attacked. They become defensive. And the person who was already suffering now also feels misunderstood and more alone. The very time they need connection the most is often the time they push it furthest away. The fourth warning sign is something even harder to see: emotional numbness. And this one is deeply counterintuitive. Because we assume that someone in severe emotional distress must be feeling a lot. Must be overwhelmed with emotion. Must be drowning. But sometimes the mind does the opposite. It shuts down. It goes flat. It disconnects from feeling entirely. A person experiencing emotional numbness might describe it as feeling like they're watching their own life from behind glass. Things that should bring joy feel neutral. Music feels like noise. Food tastes like nothing. Relationships feel like performances. They know they're supposed to feel something, but they don't. This isn't indifference. It's protection. The psyche can only absorb so much pain before it begins to anesthetize itself. Numbness is what happens when the internal system decides it cannot afford to feel anymore. The fifth sign is a loss of interest in things that once mattered, hobbies abandoned, creative pursuits dropped, conversations about the future that stop happening, plans that get quietly cancelled without replacement. When a person stops investing in the future, it's often because the future has started to feel uncertain, exhausting, or pointless in a way they can't quite articulate. Now here is where the psychology becomes even more important. The sixth warning sign is something almost invisible from the outside: a change in how a person talks about themselves. When emotional distress becomes severe, self-perception begins to shift. Quietly. Almost imperceptibly. A person starts to describe themselves differently. More negatively. The self-deprecating comments that used to be jokes stop sounding like jokes. Statements like, "I'm such a mess," or "nothing I do works," or "I'm just not a person people enjoy being around," begin appearing more frequently, spoken casually, almost offhandedly, as if they're simply stating facts. What's happening underneath is a gradual erosion of self-worth. Severe emotional distress, when prolonged, changes the inner narrative. The mind starts to believe that the exhaustion, the withdrawal, the numbness are signs of personal failure rather than signs of pain. The suffering becomes evidence of unworthiness rather than evidence of a system under enormous stress. This is one of the most important patterns to recognize, because a person who has begun to internalize their pain as identity needs a very different kind of response than we typically offer. They don't need to be told to cheer up. They need to feel seen without being fixed. The seventh sign is disrupted sleep patterns, either not being able to sleep at all, or sleeping far too much. Both are significant. Insomnia during emotional distress often happens because the mind refuses to rest. At night, when the distractions disappear and the noise of the day quiets down, the emotional pain that was being managed through activity resurfaces. The person lies awake replaying conversations, imagining worst-case scenarios, rehearsing fears that feel enormous in the dark. Hypersomnia, sleeping too much, is often the opposite mechanism. Sleep becomes a form of escape. The hours spent unconscious are hours spent away from feelings that feel unbearable to carry while awake. I want to ask you something directly. Have you ever watched someone you care about slowly change, become quieter, more distant, more tired, and not quite known what to do with that? Or have you ever been the one disappearing, hoping someone would notice without having to ask? Leave your thoughts in the comments. These conversations matter more than you might think. The eighth warning sign is the one that most people miss entirely. It's not dramatic. It doesn't look like crisis. In fact, it often looks like the opposite of crisis. It's when a person starts to seem unusually calm. Not peaceful. Not healed. Calm in a way that feels slightly off. Calm in a way that arrives suddenly after a period of visible struggle. Calm in a way where they stop talking about their problems, start tying up loose ends, start giving things away, start saying things like, "I just want people to know how much I appreciate them." This shift, from visible distress to sudden, quiet, unexplained calm, is one of the most important behavioral patterns to understand. Because it doesn't mean they're better. It sometimes means they've made a decision. That realization sits heavily. And it points to something deeper that this entire video has been quietly building toward. Emotional distress, when left unacknowledged long enough, doesn't just stay still. It doesn't plateau. It moves, deeper, darker, more internally complex, until a person either finds a way through or arrives at a place where they can no longer imagine going forward. Most of the warning signs in this video don't look like emergencies. That's exactly what makes them dangerous. Because we wait for the emergency. We wait for the obvious breakdown. We wait for the dramatic moment that tells us someone needs help. And sometimes, by the time that moment arrives, they've already been suffering quietly for months. The real tragedy of emotional distress is not that it goes unnoticed by strangers. It's that it goes unnoticed by the people closest to the person experiencing it, not from a lack of care, but from a lack of the language to see it. Here is what emotional awareness can change. Not everything. Not instantly. But something. When you know how to read these quieter signals, the withdrawal, the irritability, the numbness, the sudden calm, you become capable of a different kind of presence. Not the kind that sweeps in with solutions. Not the kind that says, "I didn't know, why didn't you tell me?" The kind that simply notices. The kind that shows up before the crisis. The kind that says, without words, "I see you." Even the version of you that's trying very hard not to be seen. Emotional awareness is not about diagnosing the people you love. It's about paying a different kind of attention to them. About understanding that strength and suffering are not opposites. That someone can be functioning and falling apart at the same time. That the people who seem least in need of checking on are often the ones who need it most. Understanding never fixes pain. But it creates the conditions where pain can finally begin to move. And sometimes, that is everything. Because the most dangerous place a person in severe emotional distress can be is not in their worst moment. It's in the long silence before anyone thought to ask. Thank you for watching this one through. If this video gave you something, a new way of seeing, a better way of understanding someone in your life, or a moment of feeling understood yourself, please share it. You never know whose hands it might reach at exactly the right time. If this is the kind of content that resonates with you, subscribe so you don't miss what we put out next. And if you'd like to go deeper, there's another video waiting for you right now that I think you'll want to see. Take care of yourself. And take care of each other.